Oh, hi there. Well, my name's Brent. I have a degree in marriage and family therapy. I'm a Buddhist teacher in the mindfulness or insight tradition, and I work as a somatic experiencing organic intelligence nervous system coach. And today I want to give you another educational video on these topics that I'm qualified to speak about, or pretend to be at least. And today's topic I want to talk about is Zen and the art of dating and romantic love. Since it is that time of year here in the Northern Hemisphere where spring is sprouting, people are coming out of their introverted winter shells here in the Seattle area. The winters here are notoriously dark and somewhat insulating. And the springs here are equally as effervescent and eros rich. And so people are starting to entertain the notions of these foolish notions of romance and dating. And so I thought I'd give a talk on that topic with insights from the Buddhist tradition, insights from the neurobiology of love, and which is very interesting. And also insights from psychology, various schools of psychology, the attachment theory being one of them. And so let's dive in. So I want to start with a Buddhist frame, and I'll start with a story from early Buddhism that I really like. And so the story goes that one seeker goes to the Buddha and starts asking the Buddha all of these metaphysical, esoteric questions, such as what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of existence? What happens when you die? Questions about various gods and goddesses and deities, and the Buddha very patiently listens to this guy and says, finally to this guy, sorry bro, that's not what I teach. I don't mess with all that stuff. I teach one thing, and that thing is suffering, its cause, and its end. That's my shtick. That's what I stick to. So good luck with that stuff. If you're interested in suffering and not suffering, I'm your guy. Um, so I really like that framework because for my personality type, I'm not so drawn to that airy-fairy, fluffy stuff. I want pragmatic, down-to-earth techniques for how to live my life in a way that, because I've had a lot of suffering and I'm not so interested in suffering these days. And so, how to do that? And in the Buddhist tradition, you might say the core of every Buddhist school is the teaching known as the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are the first noble truth that life has innate suffering embedded within it. That's part of the deal. And suffering is not the best translation of the word dukkha. Dukkha is often a word in Buddhism that's translated as suffering. But dukkha comes from the metaphor of a axle and a wheel. So if you ever travel in Asia, more developing parts of Southeast Asia, and say in Myanmar, Burma, you can go there and there's still ox carts. So people are driving the ox and they have these wooden wheeled ox carts. And there's an axle that goes into the wheel. And that wheel, there's friction that happens there. It causes heat and friction and it wears over time. And that is the literal translation of dukkha, where the axle meets the wheel. So a better translation than suffering is that life has innate friction to it. There's a rub to life, and the big rubs of life, the Buddha laid them out, are uh, not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, losing what you love, old age, sickness, and death. Those are the big frictions of life. No one gets out of that. In in the words of Jim Morrison, no one here gets out alive. And that's the first noble truth in a nutshell. Life has friction to it. The second noble truth is that there is an actual psychological cause of that suffering, and that psychological cause of that suffering is what is known as clinging or attachment, um, wanting, holding on. Tanha is the thirst, is the Buddhist word for that. Clinging is the actual cause of that suffering, or attachment to the ego's agenda for reality being a certain way other than what it is. So that is the cause of suffering, or the cause of friction. The third noble truth is that it's possible to end the excess friction of life. It's not in the sense that we're going to end old age, sickness, and death. The third noble truth is pointing to the ability for the human psychology to not cling or not be attached to life to such an extent that the friction, the excess friction of life is relieved. That's the third noble truth, or liberation, nirvana. It is possible to end suffering. The fourth noble truth is the path to the end of suffering. The ancient teachings of Buddhism, the well-worn path over 2,500 years of more and more non-clinging to the point of liberation from stress, from dukkha. So the Four Noble Truths, there they are in a nutshell. And in some way, where we human beings get the most attached, generally speaking, it's not everyone, but for the majority of us, the main place where we hold on uh, so tightly is in the realm of love, in the realm of dating, in the realm of romance, in the realm of long-term relationship. This is one of the stickiest arenas and perhaps the most challenging arena to not cling in, or to not be attached in. Uh, uh, a tune from, I think it's the 70s or 80s, comes to mind. Love hurts, love scars. Well, endless pop songs on this theme. The pain of love, the ridiculousness of love, and you know, heartbreak songs and love songs. That's pretty much pop music in a nutshell. Uh, if we switch now to a neurobiological lens of which is a very fascinating realm of research in psychology, this will shed even more light in why it's so easy to get attached and to cling in this arena of romantic love. So fMRI research from Helen Fisher um, studied the brains of people who were in the new stages of romantic love. So in psychology, there's a differentiation between love types. So there's passionate love, which is the new stages of relationship, and then there's companionate love, which is the later stages of development in the romantic relationship. And there are various brain states associated with these various stages of love. And so for people in the throes of new love or passionate love, the brain imaging studies shed light on to why that state is a pretty wild state. So if you've ever experienced this state, you have probably done or behaved in rather foolish ways. Ways that you probably later regretted. If is it just me? Uh, Foolish love. You can think of the Greek archetype of Eros or Cupid, where Eros has a bow and he shoots people with an arrow of love. And in that new love, we are literally penetrated by an arrow with a love potion on it. And it's an interesting symbology that the arrow, we are pierced by love, so we are wounded by love. And the root of the word vulnerable comes from Latin for the word wound. So in new love, we are vulnerable. We are like little babies. There's a regression that happens where we regress to a childlike state, and sometimes it's ecstatic, sometimes it's full of pain and humiliation, everything. It's a wild state. And so these brain imaging studies have shown that people in those new stages of passionate love have their brain imagery looks a lot like drug addicts, like cocaine addicts. Um, New love and cocaine addiction, very similar states if you look at the brain in the fMRI. Impulsivity, lack of future orientation, um, disregard for overall well-being, all of that goes out the window sometimes when one is shot by Cupid. Another very interesting piece from the fMRI research from Helen Fisher is that the brains also mimic or are highly related to brains of obsessive compulsive disorder. So part of the research is that in the passionate love brain, dopamine goes very high and serotonin drops 40%, which is wild. So serotonin is, low serotonin is correlated with depression, major depressive disorder, but it's also correlated with obsessive compulsive disorder, meaning when the brain is low in serotonin, there is much more ruminative thinking. Um, So, classic OCD symptom is ruminative thought loops that have no resolution, intrusive thoughts that just loop in a pattern, a merry-go-round of whoa, 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 whoa. And you hear this from the classic romance of, you've got the flower and you're just obsessing about the new love, and the poets are there with the flower and picking flower petals. She loves me not, she loves me, she loves me not, she loves me, she loves. And it's just a wheel. It's a wheel of rumination that is actually makes sense from a neurobiological lens. That's low serotonin and the brain is just looping on a theme. uh this pattern also leads to what's called in psychology surveillance behaviors. This is where this ruminating brain, and especially in the realms in the age of social media, is kind of hyper focused on the object of obsession, really, and maybe stalking them on Instagram, and and maybe going through their I don't know 5 years and focusing on one year and like, oh, she had three boyfriends during that year, and freaking out about it. When did she last log in? I wonder what she's doing now. I've never done this, by the way, never, because I'm a Buddhist teacher, so I'd never do anything like this. Never. No, not me. Anyways, that's the early stages of love. And in this, you can really hear the clinging, the attachment, the as if there was ever a recipe for dukkha, this would be it. In a Buddhist sense, this is Dukkhaville. This is the realm of in Buddhism they have various deities to represent realms of suffering. So this is the realm of hungry ghosts in a Buddhist sense. So a hungry ghost is an archetypal um, being who has a pinhole mouth and a giant belly, and no and an endless desire, an endless hunger that can never be satiated because of the pinhole mouth. And passionate love, that's the realm of dukkha. If for the hedonists among us, there are very high highs and there are extremely low lows. This is the realm of passionate love. Boom, 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 which also mimics kind of a mania, a bipolar, manic depressive, can mimic that manic depressive, huge polarized swings. So, in the arc of the neurobiology of love, part of the theory is that nature does this, creates the low serotonin, high dopamine state to increase the odds of long-term companionship, long-term pair bonding. So over time, this neurobiological cascade of high dopamine, low serotonin will evolve into a neurobiological state more informed by the neurotransmitters oxytocin and vasopressin. And that's the long-term care and love and long-term relationship with shared goals, shared understanding, shared life vision. And so the intensity of that early relationship gives way to the more secure long-term pair bonding, sharing a life together. From if we put on that Buddhist frame, that state way more associated with non-suffering than the wild roller coaster of the beginnings. So as the shift in the neurobiology goes from high dopamine, low serotonin to oxytocin, vasopressin, that's the shift over to companionate love. And one of the challenging pieces is that some couples go through that arc of the passionate love, and that has a half-life to it. When it wears off, some people realize, hey, I don't really you have much in common with this person other than we have great sexual chemistry. Or, it's like, yeah, and sometimes it's like, I don't even like this person, but we are highly sexually compatible. So some relationships, when that passionate love dies, so too dies the relationship. Or that dies out and people are already legally married and then they stay together for 40 years in a passionless and friendshipless marriage, and plenty of dukkha in that as well. So a lot of the Western psychology research would agrees with this Buddhist frame that if you're interested in long-term happiness or a long-term well-being, the research is quite clear that it's not about jumping from passionate love to passionate love to passionate love and keeping that dopamine binge going. If you're interested in long-term happiness, the orientation is towards long-term companionate love. So non-attachment is not to be confused with secure attachment. So attachment theory from psychology, it shouldn't be confused with non-attachment from a Buddhist framework. So attachment theory, a quick sprint through attachment theory is that our attachment to romantic objects really mimics the original relationship we had with our caregivers. And a person can be either securely attached, meaning really trusts in relationship, and that long-term pair bonding is much easier for securely attached peeps. Or a person can be avoidantly attached, meaning they are afraid of losing themselves in a relationship, so they avoid intimacy. Or they can be anxiously attached, which means they fear abandonment, so they will cling to relationship in a somewhat needy way. And I'm going to propose that non-attachment from a Buddhist framework is actually very conducive to secure attachment from a Western psychological perspective. So to hash that out a bit, I want to go back to Winnicott, D.W. Winnicott, who's one of the early developmental psychological researchers, worked a lot with children. And he developed the idea of the true self and the false self. That in family systems with more narcissistic parents, a narcissistic parent will put pressure on the child to be what the parent needs them to be rather than who the child actually is, which puts a lot of pressure on the child. And the child will learn to develop a false self. The child will learn to become who that parent wants them to be rather than who they actually are. And the child will always choose to develop that false self because to a child, the connection or the maintaining that relationship is a matter of survival. If that relationship ends, the biology of the child tags that with death, because for the majority of our evolution, if we lost the attachment to our caregivers, we were alone in the wilderness, and that was a death sentence. So the biology of the child will always choose false self over developing their authentic self and risking the attachment relationship. So part of that patterning is that part of the pattern is that narcissism cannot bear a difference. It can't bear the separation or the otherness of another person, especially an intimate person. So the narcissist, Carl Jung, said this very poignant phrase that the greatest burden that the child faces is the unlived life of their parents. So if a parent comes in with their unlived life, with that agenda, then they will project that upon the child, and then the child will develop this false self to appease the parent rather than who the child actually is. You can, can see that I grew up in Blue Collarville, and if you ever want a lesson in this, go to a Little League game. So remember in Bremerton, the Little League games, there would just be stands. The stands would be full of these blue collar guys drinking beer and screaming at their child, to live their failed athletic dreams on the Little League field, and if any failure was directly symbolic to their own failure and likewise triumph. So they literally living vicariously through these Little League games. Very intense. Another story from this, to maybe hammer this point home. So, okay, there's a story where there's a bunch of adults that go out to dinner, and then there's a young girl, let's say 8 years old, and she's there, and all the adults are yapping, and she's just kind of sitting by herself. And then the waitress comes and takes everyone's order, and then she gets to the little girl. And the waitress says, "Oh, what would you like, little girl?" And the little girl says, "Oh, I'd like a hot dog, and I'd like some French fries, and I'd like a Coca-Cola." And then the dad chimes in, "Oh no, she doesn't. She doesn't want that. She wants meatloaf, and she wants mashed potatoes, and she wants a glass of milk." And then the waitress turns to the little girl and says, "Would you like some ketchup with those fries?" And then leaves. And then the adults sit in stunned silence. And then the little girl says, "Wow, you know what? She thinks I'm real." True self, false self. Okay, so with that framework of true self, false self, how does that apply to the realm of dating? So earlier on, we spoke about, if you're interested in not suffering, that long-term companionate love beats out the early throes of passionate love any day of the week from multiple perspectives. All of the psychological research points at that. So does the wisdom traditions of the East. If you're interested in less dukkha, that's the way to go. So what happens if you bring that agenda into, say, a first date? An agenda for, oh, I want this person to be, I see this pattern a lot in clients. They go on the first date and they're shopping for a husband or a wife or whatever that may be. Uh, and they're bringing in a big agenda. And if one is not careful, one is going to see the other person on that first date through that lens of who I want this person to be rather than who they actually are, which is a setup for a lot of dukkha. Um, in some ways, it's jumping ahead like 15 chapters. So it might not be the best orientation for new romance, new dating. Maybe a better orientation would be just a radical acceptance of the other person for who they are and whatever dynamic is unfolding in the here and now. Uh, Paradoxically, not being attached to early relationship dynamics is a setup for more secure attachment. So bringing this attachment into the especially early throes of a relationship leads to the insecure attachment, because rather than seeing that person for who they are, I'm seeing them through the lens of who I want them to be. Rather than listening to them deeply, I'm maybe trying to squeeze them into an idea I have of who would make the best companion and long-term partner. That's a recipe for dukkha, recipe for perhaps ignoring red flags, or maybe, you see this a lot where people pick a project partner. Where it's like, oh, I'm gonna, it's like they're buying a house. I'm gonna get a fixer-upper. This guy's got potential, and if I might just be able to fix him and, maybe manipulate him into being a candidate for a long-term companionate love. That's going to be actually a setup for insecure attachment. The attachment to the person being a certain way is just little psychological games, zero-sum games one plays with the other to try to manipulate them. And that's just a setup for insecure attachment, anxious attachment. It's usually the anxious attachment person that is trying to fix the avoidant person into loving them how they want that. And that avoidants are very sensitive to that. So the avoidant is just going to withdraw from that psychological manipulation, which is going to make the anxious pursue them even more, which is going to make the avoidant withdraw. And then comes the in attachment, that's the anxious avoidant death spiral, the feedback loop of trying to fix, running away, trying to fix, running away. So paradoxically, not being attached to what happens in a relationship might be the best approach to secure attachment. That's a question I leave to you, or a koan to maybe think about. One final musing from a Buddhist and Jungian lens would be that from a Buddhist framework, one of the main causes of dukkha is what is known as anicca in Buddhism. Anicca translates as impermanence. It's the existential view of reality, the equivalent to Western existentialism, that everything we love is going to die because it's a finite universe. Everyone we love is going to die. Even me, who I take myself to be, in 100 years, no one's probably going to remember my name. I will be lost. Brent will be lost to the sands of time. So with that view, every time we open ourselves up to loving something or someone, we're also opening up ourselves to a profound grief. And from a Jungian framework, however much we allow ourselves to love, we are going to grieve in an equal amount. And so many people, subconsciously or consciously, will just not let themselves love at all, because no love, no grief. But then life is flat. So the game, if you will, is like, how much can I let myself feel grief? How much can I ride that wave of love and grief? And in Buddhism, the trick to doing that is to develop resilience, to develop an openness to life, not in the flattening of life, but a willingness to ride those big waves of love and grief. So that's another model for secure attachment. It's or non-attachment. Rather than trying to control the other person in a narcissistic way, or rather than trying to squeeze them into who I want them to be, it's how non-attached can I be to this dynamic and just let myself go on that ride. And who knows where that ride is going to go. And this is another huge problem people run into in the beginning of, that passionate roller coaster. They have an agenda. I want this to go a certain way. And that agenda is often at odds with reality, because reality has its own trajectory. This person you are so passionately involved with, at the end of the day, there are so many factors. Maybe it's not going to work out how you want it to, and there'll be a big wave of grief. Maybe it will. And these are the final thoughts I leave to you. Please comment below if this stirred any questions. Love to have a conversation about that. Thanks for listening if you made it this far, and thank you for your attention. Take care.